Dragon Age The Veilguard has kind of come and gone to a certain degree. A lot of people have already played it, maybe some people are waiting to play it later on, but the big question on everyone's mind right now is what is waiting for Bioware? What is the future of the studio, and did Dragon Age The Veilguard flop? Did it kill Bioware? What's happening from here? What's happening with Mass Effect 5? Because yes, internally Andromeda is Mass Effect 4, so the next one is 5. Sorry for those of you who didn't know that. What's going on with the new show by Amazon? Just in general, what is going on after the launch of Veilguard, its reception, its sales, all of these things. And that's what we're here to cover today. And this video is roughly divided into two parts. We're going to look at how Dragon Age The Veilguard has performed, what EA is probably thinking about it right now, and what they already knew beforehand, because while a lot of people are insisting that it's a flop, flop is not the same as being underwhelming in sales or not really being a success. There's more to dig into here, and I think a lot of people are overlooking a lot of the stuff regarding Veilguard. And from there, what's going on with Mass Effect? Because we've heard plenty of news, we've had multiple comments from the director of Mass Effect 5 about it, comparing it to the Veilguard. So there's a lot to talk about, put a lot of effort into this one. And by the way, if you're new here, welcome. And if you're not new here, welcome back. I'm Mug. And before we get into it today, this video has a sponsor that a lot of you have said you've already enjoyed a ton, so I'm really glad they're back. For a pretty large portion of my life, I worked in education, and I got to witness hands-on some of the bigger problems within it. And because I've seen the problems that come with it, is why I'm happy that I have Boot.dev as a recurring sponsor on the channel. Boot.dev is a learning platform for back-end web development, but the philosophy with which they've created it is there to teach you, for real. It's a platform for you to learn Python and Go from start to finish, but they understand that the most important part of learning something well is making sure that you enjoy the process. Learning is supposed to be fun. So Boot.dev takes you through a ton of different coding courses where you actually get to code, with an interface that allows you to feel like you're playing an RPG, slowly progressing, and using gamification to keep you motivated and show you the progress that you've made from the start. And because the goal here is that you learn, you can try Boot.dev out completely for free. Everything within the course you can access and check out without spending a single dime. You pay for the membership in order to get coding and see the feedback from the system, to actually interact. But if you wanted to use it as one of the largest textbooks in the world on back-end web development, you can. And even after checking it out, they have a 30-day no questions asked refund policy. Because Boot.dev wants you to learn something new. They want you to find a new job that has many more career opportunities than maybe wherever you are right now. So click the link in the description or the pinned comment to check out Boot.dev completely for free. And if you decide to sign up, you can use code Mugthief to get 25% off your first order. That means your first month or your first year, whatever you prefer, you're gonna get 25% off. And thank you once again to Boot.dev for sticking with this channel. One of the more common things I've seen online is people saying that Dragon Age The Veilguard is a flop, and that's a very complicated thing to say. It's very different from saying that it sold poorly or that it underperformed, because I think what's safe to say is that it isn't a success, especially in a year filled with successes. Smaller ones like Stellar Blade or Silent Hill 2, which reported over 1 million sales in just 3 days. And then there's other huge successes, things like Black Myth Wukong and Space Marine 2, which have really blown out a lot of the bigger AAA offerings out of the water. And Veilguard is not putting up those sorts of numbers at all. Sure, we have very limited data so far, which is predicted Steam sales based on concurrent players, unique players, and playtimes. It's this little algorithm to kind of calculate the sales based off of that. And while that isn't the complete picture, because we don't know, maybe Veilguard has been very successful on consoles, for example, we can compare it pound for pound with a lot of other stuff, make some very educated guesses, and say that it's not doing very hot. But a flop is a very different thing. And I've talked about this distinction before. I'm just saying that in my opinion, a flop is relative to the cost and the expectations of the game, versus just calling something underwhelming in sales or that it underperformed for the expectations. There's a lot of nuance here. An indie game might sell 50,000 copies and make tons of money compared to its budget and the amount of staff and all of that. Plenty of live service games get called today as games that have failed or are dying, something like Helldivers 2 or The Finals, that are both very healthy in their player bases, at least financially. Speaking from the perspective of keeping them up and running and giving them new content and making sure that they can kind of grow into the future. And this is why we could call Concord a flop. It's because we knew the numbers and because it was such a huge absolute disaster. It's safe to say that it's underperforming in sales. It hasn't had a big splash. It didn't get 200,000 concurrent players day one, but we don't know how EA is actually measuring it compared to their budget, because there's a lot of stuff there that they can kind of modify or choose to approach differently. And all of this matters a ton towards where this is headed and towards what could happen to the Dragon Age IP. Could we ever see it come back? And also, of course, what the heck is going on with Mass Effect? That's very much informed by this. And the truth is that EA can kind of spin the Veilguard whichever way it wants. It's very important to recognize that EA is doing very well financially. This is not a Ubisoft type of situation. The bread and butter for EA at this point are their sports games, and those are selling just as well as ever. Sure, with a million complaints, but that doesn't matter. They sell gangbusters, especially I know that FIFA Ultimate Team, or I guess EA Sports, whatever they do now, sells a ton. Not just that, I've heard a lot of people say very good things about EA College Football, saying that they're actually doing cool stuff within sports, which is something that I'd never really imagined. But that's their backbone. That's how they make most of their money. And they have more than enough money in those fields to write out other failures that they might have. Apex Legends, not at its best moment right now. Veilguard, probably not very hot. So keep that in mind. This isn't a situation like Sony with Firewalk. This isn't Dragon Age The Veilguard concorded and they need to get rid of the studio right now as a tax write-off or something. No, EA would only get rid of Bioware right now if they wanted to, not because they need to. Veilguard might underperform, but there's many ways that they can look at it. And that's because they really can just spin this however they want. It's a testament to what a company can do, especially if they're in a healthy financial position. Because sure, you can say that Dragon Age The Veilguard was in production for at least 8 years, and that probably that budget is going to be very high for a game that isn't selling very well. But EA can also spin this when it comes to reporting it to their budgets, to shareholders, as this game went through a lot of changes. This game at one point was a live service Dragon Age game and then pivoted completely from that into what it is today. And if they chose to not count all of that development or to write it into a very expensive production cycle for the engine and for learning what they needed to do and the new gameplay systems, they could. They could count it as a training process for a lot of the new team, because I'm not going to get tired of repeating it. This is basically a new Bioware team with a couple of veterans. There's not really many Bioware veterans left, and if you're looking for the game where those Bioware veterans have congregated to, it's Exodus, which is basically Mass Effect but not Mass Effect. That's where most of that team is headed, by the way. We'll probably cover that a bit later on when we know more. And I think overall, and this is something that a lot of the people asking the question of if it's a flop are ignoring, Dragon Age The Veilguard is an experiment in more ways than one. Not only did it have that transition from live service, which I think was the correct transition. I mean, we know publishers like to gaslight us, so if it were a failure, they would be calling out that they should have made it a live service game because gamers don't like single-player games. You guys know how it works at this point. But I honestly think that if Veilguard had been a live service game, it would have actually concorded. Like, that's a real flop. Right? The numbers we're seeing from Veilguard is underperforming. That doesn't mean it's a disaster like Concord, for example. But that's not even where the experimental part of it goes. It's the fact that it's a single-player game that has no DRM, no early access, no DLC plans, which is a really important thing looking towards Mass Effect 5. On PC, it was sold at $59.99. There's a lot of weird stuff going on with the Veilguard that feels like EA testing the waters for single-player games and where they could break even. And I think that if they are truly treating it as an experiment in that case, they are probably trying to measure it against a predicted budget and not caring too much about how much money they wasted on it during its weird development. And all of those things I just mentioned are things that they can spin either positively or negatively. They could say that Dragon Age is a failed franchise and not put into account the fact that with no DRM, there probably was more piracy related to it. Or they could very easily spin it as the game did wonderful numbers despite not having any DRM. They truly left like so many different doors open to then either justify or condemn Bioware and the game because of all of these weird circumstances around it. So is it a flop? We will likely never know. EA gets to decide that. And while we can say that its performance is underwhelming, we do have to keep in mind the context. Dragon Age was never a bestseller for EA or for Bioware. Mass Effect was always much stronger in sales, and a lot of the sales and the love for Dragon Age came over time. These are games that sold very well over years, another one of the very large positives of making a single-player game that isn't attached to some live service or some FOMO feeling. You generally get to see their sales kind of stay healthy for a longer period of time and pop back up on sales and things like that. And Dragon Age The Veilguard still has the whole holiday season to maybe recover something that makes it go from very underwhelming to almost even didn't cost us that much money, because it definitely did. It's an 8-year production cycle, but again, like I said, it's a complicated one. So here's the facts. I think Bioware will be left safe to work on Mass Effect 5. EA really wants to find out if they can exploit the value of this IP, of the big seller of probably what is the most recognizable Bioware franchise at this point, and make an honest effort to bring it back. And they did a lot of experimenting, they made a lot of mistakes, they switched gears with the live service stuff and all of that, and that was all kind of a proving ground. And I guess if you wanted to be positive, you could view it as a testing ground for a lot of the new team here at BioWare when faced with making Mass Effect 5. What I do think, unfortunately, is true at this point is that it did kind of kill Dragon Age. I think Dragon Age is going to be put on ice for a while, just by the nature of them now working on Mass Effect 5, but also because not being very successful, unless it has a wonderful long tail or something like that in sales later on, I think the world of Thetis isn't really going to be explored much later on. Maybe it'll be thrown to the wolves of the mobile game market or something like that, but I find it unlikely that EA is going to try and revive it after the underwhelming performance of the Veilguard. Stranger things have happened, sure. After Andromeda, they're still making Mass Effect 5, so who knows? The Veilguard is definitely better than Andromeda, I think by pretty much every metric in my opinion. So hey, maybe once they have a better grasp on what they're doing, they could return, but I don't think that's going to be anytime soon. But I briefly mentioned they're working on Mass Effect 5, and that's an important detail that I think a lot of people haven't really caught on to. I mentioned it in a previous video, and a lot of you seem surprised in the comments. BioWare is a one-game team now. They used to have the Dragon Age team and the Mass Effect team, now it's all one team. After they switched from live service Dragon Age, they brought on the Mass Effect team to support with everything in development for the Veilguard. And you can tell that Mass Effect DNA is there in multiple different ways, for better or for worse, depending on who you ask. And sure, now that it's all one team, the big difference is going to be leadership and where some of those decisions are made. But this is now all one big group of people working on these games. And the fact that the Veilguard is not receiving any DLC, I think is a testament that they know what they're doing. They know that this game wasn't going to be that successful. We've already talked about how EA tried to cover the divisive nature of the game up. And they said, look, we're not investing anybody doing anything. We're not supporting the Veilguard later on. There's going to be no DLC in the future. Everybody, all hands on deck. We're making Mass Effect 5. And this is where you could view this as both good and bad news. So let's talk about Mass Effect. So when it comes to Mass Effect 5, I think there's a lot of reasons to look at it with a hopeful view, and also some reasons to look at it very negatively, and I want to explore both of those. To start off, Michael Gamble is the director on Mass Effect 5. He's been in leadership positions over at BioWare ever since Mass Effect 2. At this point, he's the Mass Effect guy. And he's been very vocal about it. About a year ago, he said he wants to do right by the franchise. He very publicly accepted that Andromeda was not good, and he was on it. He is accepting his own fault, and we can hope that he means that. When asked about the Veilguard and some of the things people didn't like about it, he's reassured people that Mass Effect is a very adult series, that it's not meant to have a jovial, happy-go-lucky tone, that it's meant to be a serious sci-fi adventure, and that he wants to be faithful to the tone of the original trilogy. He said that when it comes to the visual style, Mass Effect is photorealistic. He seems to be just reaffirming, hey, we're making Mass Effect the one you want. We're not doing Andromeda, we're doing what should have been Mass Effect 4 now, okay? Now, can you trust him on that? That's really up to you. That's why it depends on how you want to view it. The other thing to consider is that, like I said, a lot of this new BioWare team is new. And maybe a lot of the stuff that went on with the Veilguard is something that they can learn from and do things better. And Michael Gambel is also working on the TV show, which is a really big deal. So let's split up into two things. Let's talk about the game, then at the very end, we're going to talk about the TV show. And with the game, I think that it's safe to say that a lot of the stuff regarding it is very much set in stone. It's already been decided, a lot of the design stuff is there. But I think that if Mass Effect 5 is going to be successful, it really needs to learn lessons from Veilguard. And a lot of the team that worked on Veilguard that is going to have other roles or are going to be fulfilling things within Mass Effect 5 really need to learn from it. Remember, new team. It's essentially a lot of the people here are completely new and they're learning as they go. And the important thing to me is that they actually learn. Because if they don't, and if Mass Effect 5 has the same issues as Dragon Age The Veilguard, then EA is going to lock up both of the IPs, everything regarding Bioware, going to shut down the studio, and bye-bye, and probably well-deserved at that point. You can only get that many second chances. We went through Andromeda and Anthem and Veilguard. Within all of the complaints, the very legitimate, very real complaints, don't let people tell you there's nothing to complain about. Also, don't let people tell you that the game is the worst thing ever made. Sure, it's an improvement, but there's still a lot of room for improvement here. So I think that the team working on Veilguard, a lot of the people for whom it was their first game in the Bioware world within the studio, they need to understand the criticisms that are there because they matter a lot. And while I'm going to go into a lot of this in my analysis of the Veilguard, which that review was meant to be out, but I decided to make it a bit bigger. I really want to give the game the constructive criticism it deserves. So I'm going all in on that video. Hopefully it doesn't do terribly. Remember to subscribe, thank you. Because I think it's valuable to have those conversations, but it can't have TV level writing. It can't basically not have any roleplay available. Like being evil, being renegade in Mass Effect is such an important part of the experience. Just the overall feeling of choice needs to be present, which it really isn't here. There's issues with gameplay, with level design, some of the puzzle stuff. There's a lot of kinks to work out from here, and I don't know how much of that are remnants from the live service design of the Veilguard, but it doesn't matter the reason. There are lessons that need to be learned, and of course there's always a possibility that they're not learned. There's a chance that they close their eyes and they'll just go like, la 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 la, my game is perfect. I actually have to do more of the things you say you don't like because that's what proves it's good. But hopefully that doesn't happen. It's their job to not do that. It's their job to discern from the people that are unfairly loving the game when it has real issues and the people unfairly criticizing the game. But if they do learn, the good news is that Mass Effect is a relatively easier beast to tackle. Dragon Age does have that problem of coming from 3 different games beforehand with different levels of role-playing in them, different approaches to them, and very different gameplay styles that does already fracture the player base. Mass Effect is much simpler. It has been the same game for all 3 of the entries that we really care about. It hasn't varied from its core. It's still the dialogue wheel, it's still Paragon and Renegade. That's how it's worked. You just have to focus on nailing that down. And you're not going to have these conversations of, but you betrayed us, we still want you to go back to Dragon Age Origins, right? Mass Effect has been consistent. So it really comes down to your perspective on this and your faith on people doing their jobs, I guess. I do believe that within Dragon Age The Veilguard, within all of the inconsistencies that it has, within all of the issues I have with the game, and while I will say that I did struggle to finish it in the end, I did still enjoy a lot of what I was doing, like aware of a lot of the issues. I could point them out all the time, but I didn't find it terrible. That's a testament that there is a good game buried beneath all of the bad stuff in there. So there is a chance that if they learn, they can kind of just, trim all of the bad stuff, focus in on the good stuff, and make a really good game. And the fact that I've seen a lot of people online echo that sentiment of, hey, look, I have a ton of issues with this game, but I can see where it could be enjoyed or where it could be good, also speaks to that idea that it's not the worst thing ever made. It's just a game that has a lot of issues, and depending on who you are and your expectations coming in, those are really going to affect you a lot more. So there is a chance for this team. This isn't Firewalk. They can, hopefully, take the proper steps under the right leadership and make a great Mass Effect 5, which I think we should all be rooting for. I do not want BioWare to just disappear and for Mass Effect to be gone. Sure, if I compare it with the other option of it just being consistently butchered and made worse and worse or something like that, yeah, maybe at that point I would just like to leave it be. But I still think the best outcome is we just get more better Mass Effect. That would be pretty cool. The likelihood of that, it's early to tell. What does communicate to us that it's going to be a huge deal is the Mass Effect TV show, though. Being produced in partnership with Amazon, so very similar to the Fallout TV show situation, which, hey, I know a lot of people don't like that show. I think the Fallout show was pretty good. And hey, season 2, they've cast Macaulay Culkin in a recurring role, which is great. I think that's good casting. He's gonna fit in really well. But it doesn't matter your opinions on the show, it definitely boosted the franchise tremendously. We saw player numbers soar, we saw sales spike. We know that Bethesda is sitting down desperately seeing what they can come out with for the launch of season 2 or shortly thereafter, because it was such a big success. And probably that's what the Mass Effect show wants to be. This huge resurgence that, because it's probably coming in a while, they might want to pair with either promotion or the actual release of Mass Effect 5, or even better, they might want to have the show exist and then maybe 6 months or a year out, have Mass Effect 5 come out after a bunch of people watch the show, get interested in it, go play Mass Effect the Legendary Edition, which is great, it's still great. There's a very clear game plan here that they want to execute, but now you're putting pressure on both the game and the show, and that's complicated because a lot of the things regarding the show are not inspiring confidence. It's being written by Daniel Casey, which you might know from being the writer of Fast and Furious 9, which already makes me afraid that we're headed more in a Ocean's 11 direction than a Game of Thrones in space direction. But hey, I mean, there's a very fine line to walk with Mass Effect and its tone and the way you want to pitch it, right? There is also Kareem Drake, which has experience from the Marvel TV side of things, which, hey, I like Daredevil, I really like Legion, so I'm not gonna judge too harshly. I think that anything that I can take away from the Marvel TV Netflix deal was that they did what they could to appropriately make them dark in a way that was interesting back then. And then the final piece of the puzzle on the production side is Ari Arad, which has worked on Borderlands, the movie. Okay, so everyone misses from time to time. So he also did Uncharted and Ghost in the Shell. So we're not batting real well here. So I guess the real saving grace here might be Michael Gamble, who is also executive producing. And the problem with that is that Michael seems to be taking on a lot of stuff right here. A lot of pressure both on the show and on this game. You basically have a franchise riding on it, and then also the entirety of BioWare riding on it. And that doesn't get my hopes up, let's say it that way. But at the end of the day, the takeaways that I really want you to have from this video is that calling Dragon Age the Veilguard a flop is a complicated thing to do. There was a lot of experimentation going on, and it hasn't killed BioWare. Mostly because unless there is a disaster in development, or potentially a disaster in both the development and the TV show, BioWare is going to be around to make Mass Effect. That's their real last shot because it's the most valuable IP that EA is doubling down on. They're making the TV show, all of these things. So there is a big difference between saying that the Veilguard didn't sell well, that it underperformed, that it had underwhelming sales, things like that, and then actually calling it a flop or talking about how it impacts the studio. Like I said, there's a lot going on here, from its very complicated development lifecycle to the very strange experiments of things like the price on PC, the no DRM, the 100% single player with no DLC and no future, anything, no early access, no nothing. There's a lot of strange things here that definitely come from the publishing side, where they are testing waters out for stuff. And the issue with testing stuff out is that gives EA the opportunity to spin things either positively or negatively depending on how they feel. Which, hey, is smart if you're trying to convince shareholders of things. And honestly, it's very hard to debate from the journalism side, from my side of like, no, actually it is terrible sales-wise because they have access to a lot of the information that we don't. So barring a leak of internal documents, of budgets, of a lot of the stuff inside, I don't recommend that you listen to people that are outright calling it a flop or not. It's fine to have an educated opinion on it, but I don't think it's fair, because that is the truth. There is a lot of weird stuff going on here, and unfortunately, the best thing I think that could happen for us as gamers is for EA to rule it as an experiment that was successful while acknowledging the criticisms. That would be the ideal, because that means we're going to get more AAA single-player games without all of that garbage, without the early access, without the DLC season passes for single-player games, without DRM screwing up our performance and things like that. If it's ruled out as something positive, it does have an overall net positive effect on the industry, but as long as they learn from it, that's the important thing. As long as it's also true that it did decently well in sales compared to what they were projecting, given those circumstances. What is also a very important takeaway here is that Mass Effect 5 is going to be a very big deal for, not EA. EA just makes sports games. And also Respawn exists and they make Apex and the Star Wars games, right? Like that's what EA is at this point. It's really a big deal for Bioware. So while Dragon Age The Veilguard hasn't killed Bioware, it might have killed Dragon Age. That's sad, but in the end we're quite a years away, and hopefully I can see one of my favorite video game franchises of all time, Mass Effect, come back. I'm not preparing for that. I'm preparing for the worst, but I'll keep a close eye on it as usual. There's reasons to be hopeful, there's reasons to not be, and there's a lot that could happen. But when it comes to Dragon Age The Veilguard, there's a lot under the surface going on here that I think we're going to see materialize in many different ways over the development of Mass Effect 5. Hopefully this clarified a lot of that information, as per usual, cuts through some of the very aggressive noise out there. And if you did enjoy the video, remember to hit the like button. If you want more from me, including that Dragon Age The Veilguard video, it's really big. I'm sorry for the delay, but it's good, I promise. Remember to subscribe. A very special thanks to my patrons up on the $1 patron wall. They support everything I do, and I am eternally grateful to them. If you want to join, there's only one tier, $1. The link is in the description down below. Thank you so much for watching. I've been Mug, and as always, I'll see you again very soon.